Black family. I love y'all. BB48.
Now we're going to show a brief clip. I want you to watch this, brothers and sisters, because it's from Sister Gwen Ragsdale. They up in Philadelphia. And this kind of shows you, remember, who was it that financed the Atlantic slave trade? The same small hats that created the Hamitic myth. And I want you just to see how they now take the Hamitic myth and use it in terms of real black people, this sexualizing of our people, and this sexual assault on our race.
Countries that traded in human bondage for decades found it necessary to obtain more Africans to enslave. Cattle farmers who were experienced at breeding cattle found it easy to make the transition into the breeding of human beings. Slave breeders were highly selective and went to auctions to seek the biggest and healthiest slaves they could find. There were many poor quality slaves on the market in those days. Most were either too sick, old, or badly damaged during the capture and voyage. They studied different African tribes to determine which ones would make the best breeders. Mandingo men were highly sought after because they were big, strong, and had large genitalia. Senegalese women were considered most attractive because their chiseled features resembled European women. Formulas were developed to produce the highest quality slave in order to achieve the highest dollar amount. During their working life, a female slave spent most of her time pregnant, and most owners put a high value on good breeders. Once a pregnancy was achieved, records were maintained that included how long it took to achieve a pregnancy, the weight and size of the baby produced, and most importantly, its health and physical characteristics. The male breeding stud would be put with another woman, and the process continued. When a male slave turned 15, he had his first inspection. Boys who were underdeveloped with small testicles or small penises were castrated and sent to the market. Others were used on the farm in other capacities. Female slaves were inspected at age 13 or whenever they received their first menstrual cycles. Those with large breasts and wide hips were considered better suited for breeding. A male slave was expected to impregnate at least 12 females a year. Those capable of impregnating more were given extra. Female slaves were used to produce 10 offspring, but those who produced exceptional ones with little or no complications were used for up to 15. The male studs were used in the breeding process for a period of 5 years, but those showing excellent performance were used for 10 years or more. Within a 3-year period, owners had a good idea of who were the best people for breeding. As soon as a male produced an inferior offspring, he was immediately castrated to stop further breeding and sometimes used as eunuchs to guard prize heifers from being impregnated by non-pedigreed bucks. Others were retained for general work or sold. Females who were no longer suitable for breeding were used to nurse and care for other children, assigned to other plantation duties, or sold to brothels. Only the strongest and healthiest babies were kept for further breeding. Those born with deformities of even the slightest detail in many cases were used for alligator bait or just killed outright, as breeding was very carefully monitored to ensure that only the finest specimens were produced. The breeding males were castrated to prevent them from ever breeding again. After 20 years of breeding exceptionally high quality slaves, a third generation of newly bred slaves were used as breeders and their predecessors were retired. Males were consistently inspected to make sure they were producing the highest quality offspring. Each month, males were called in for inspection, their genital area shaved, and their testicles inspected for any signs of lumps or defects. Other slaves.
That's very serious. But what we're doing, and I know it's very heavy, but we're just trailing over thousands of years, seeing how this idea of the sexual brutality of African people is part of what makes the whites the enemies to black people and why we have fought them for thousands of years. So what we got to start understanding is when we start looking at freedom fighters for black people, when we get the history of our brothers and sisters, we get one little aspect in a line. We don't understand. Each of the real serious warrior freedom fighters for our people was not only dealing with fighting slavery or fighting lynching. They were dealing with everything that we're dealing with today. Maybe not use the same words, but the same idea. Let's look at Sister Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth directed much of her preaching to the newly freed black masses. Seeing the almost total reliance on handouts from the Freedmen's Bureau, she warned the freedmen that they must not become dependent on government charity programs or else they would lose their will to work. She urged them to cast aside the irresponsible attitudes towards marriage and childbirth learned in slavery and warned them that the breakdown of morals between black men and women would affect future generations to come. What is she talking about when she said the breakdown between morals between black men and women? The lesbianism that they forced us into. The irresponsible behavior of black men who were not allowed to take care of their children, and so we developed a habit of making children and not taking care of them. The homosexuality forced on our people, the rape, now we were involved in this kind of thing. All those things, this sister and every other brother and sister that was fighting for our people were dealing with these same things, but because the enemy was right in front of them, they could just point to the enemy and not have to detail every account of what they were fighting. But they were fighting the very same things, which at the core tells you that the African freedom fight has not just been against whites as individuals, but against their culture from the beginning. All the real freedom fighters are not just fighting the physical white, but they're fighting what white represents, which is decadence, abuse, violence, sexual terrorism, which has always been part of the construct of the African freedom fighter. We go further, we look at the largest single movement in the history of the world from a black person. The largest single independent black movement in the history of the world. It lived for a very short time because the whites and the homosexuals and the Negroes destroyed it. But the UNIA started by Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Marcus Mosiah Garvey came when our people had been killed during slavery. You saw the condition we were in. He awakened the dead and got our people ready to stand up and do something for ourselves. This is what we got to understand. Go look at his writings. Go look at the things he was teaching. He wasn't just saying, be a strong black man and protect your family, which was part of the core. You got to be a man. You got to look this white devil in the face. You got to fight him if necessary. You got to protect your women and children. He was also saying, be independent. Start your own businesses. Let's do for ourselves. Let's build our military infrastructure to protect our people all around the world. But he was also teaching things as simple as always be clean. Always dress your best. Make sure that when you go out in public, you look and smell your best. You know, bathe on a regular basis. Be iron, be sharp, because you want to be a proper representative and proper representation of a people who should be ruling this planet. Meaning what? Decency was married. It wasn't just about being strong and fighting physically. You also had to be a decent human being, and the character of a black person was matched to the militancy to make what we call a strong black man. His whole movement was about that. When his movement was collapsed, another man came and was able to pick up the pieces from that movement and then make it stronger and add elements. And the element that he added that made it so powerful, a couple of elements. One, he gave us a clear concept of who our enemy was. He said the white man is the devil. The white race is the devil. They're Satan. What was he saying? He didn't give you all the details of Satan. What does that mean, though? This is a wicked being, which means what? He's a homosexual. Culturally, he's violent. He's sexually degenerate. He's a thief. He's a murderer. All of those things are in there. He just didn't say them each. So what did he do? In order to combat not just the physical European, but all that behavior in our community, he created an extremely disciplined structure. So if you were part of the Nation of Islam, you had the brothers on one side, the sisters on another side. You weren't allowed to be independently out there with other brothers, sisters, because we had gotten all these bad habits from the European, going around trying to deal with each other's wives and husbands and all that.